Every time the Navy rolls out a new aircraft carrier, the chatter usually heads in the same direction. People rave about its size, speed, and how many jets it can hold on deck. Sure, those details are cool and make for great photos, but they're not what really wins wars. Aircraft carriers don't just show up quickly, they dominate because they keep pushing forward. The latest addition, the USS Gerald R. Ford, comes loaded with a weapon that rarely gets the spotlight. You won't catch this in flashy headlines or wild recruitment videos. It doesn't dazzle on the flight deck or launch anything thrilling into the sky. You could stare at the ship all day and not even notice it. But once you do, you realize modern naval warfare has a whole new vibe. And just so you know, the Ford-class carrier doesn't come cheap. It's about $13 billion. Add in research and development, and it's a huge deal. Integration, the total bill climbs several $billion higher. But what gets lost in that argument is what the Navy was actually paying for. The ship was not built to be bigger than its predecessors. It was built to behave differently than them. And the fact of the matter is that no matter how powerful aircraft carriers have always looked, their effectiveness was always limited by something far less dramatic than enemy missiles or bad weather. They were limited by time. Every jet that launches has to come back. Every jet that lands has to be refueled, rearmed, inspected, repositioned, and then launched again. Crews have to move ordnance. Elevators have to cycle. Deck space has to be cleared and reused over hours and days. Those steps decide how much air power a carrier actually delivers. That rhythm is known as sortie generation, and it sets the ceiling on how much pressure a carrier can apply. A carrier that carries dozens of aircraft but can only launch them slowly becomes predictable. A carrier that, launching aircraft hour after hour, can feel pretty overwhelming. The Navy didn't care about how fast a ship could go. Nuclear power already took care of that. They weren't worried about how many aircraft could fit on deck either. That was figured out long ago. What they really wanted to know was something a bit more intense. How fast can this ship reload? How quickly can it recover aircraft, get them ready, and send them back into action without missing a beat? And how long can it keep this up before the crew needs a break? Machines start to fail? Those questions were the driving force behind almost every major design choice on the Ford class, and they explain why this ship looks familiar at a distance, but behaves very differently up close. In modern warfare, tempo decides who adapts and who reacts. The Ford class was designed to apply pressure without interruption. It can run past 30 knots, which is no small thing for a ship of that size. Nuclear propulsion lets it keep operating without routine fuel stops. But speed alone doesn't explain why this carrier is different. In a real conflict, carriers do not chase enemies across the ocean like racing yachts. They position themselves, establish operating areas, and begin music cycling aircraft. That's where the older carriers began to show their limits. Previous classes were never designed for the kind of sustained high-tempo operations that modern conflicts demand. The Ford class was built to change that equation. From the earliest design stages, the Navy treated sortie generation as a central requirement, not as an afterthought. That meant rethinking how aircraft move, how weapons move, how people move, and how electricity is distributed across the ship. The Ford class generates far more electrical power than its predecessors to support systems that reduce friction everywhere else. More power means more automation. More automation means fewer delays. And fewer delays means more aircraft in the air over time. This is where the ship's price tag starts to make sense. The Ford class is often compared to other nations' carriers, and the gap is enormous. Most of the world's carriers are smaller, conventionally powered, and built around far lower operational tempos. Some navies can launch a handful of aircraft at a time. Others rely on ski jump ramps that limit aircraft weight and payload. Even the most capable non-US carriers cannot sustain the kind of flight operations the Ford class is designed to handle. They were never meant to. Their strategic goals are different. Their budgets are smaller. Their doctrine accepts limits the US Navy does not. That comparison matters because the Ford class is not just a ship. It is a statement about how the United States expects future wars to unfold. In a conflict across the Pacific, distance is a weapon. Bases are far apart. Replenishment windows are narrow. Aircraft have long transit times. Every delay compounds. A carrier that can regenerate aircraft faster than its opponent can respond gains an advantage that is hard to counter without escalating dramatically. That advantage does not announce itself with explosions. It shows up when aircraft keep arriving after the enemy expects the deck to be empty, when defenses remain under constant pressure instead of short predictable bursts, when pilots land, refuel, reload, and launch again, while the opponent is still trying to repair damage from the last wave. This is why the Ford's most important capability is easy to overlook, and it only becomes obvious after hours of sustained operations. The Navy knows this, which is why they have been careful about how they talk about it publicly. Promising specific sorting numbers invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites criticism when reality fails to match projections perfectly. The Ford program has already faced its share of technical hurdles, from new launch systems to weapons elevators that took longer than expected to mature. Those issues matter, and they will matter even more in wartime. No ship is flawless. So, it goes without saying that no system works exactly as advertised under combat conditions. But even critics can agree on one thing. The Ford class represents a deliberate attempt to change how carriers fight, not just how they look. The ship was built to make sustained air power routine instead of exceptional. And that shift has consequences that ripple far beyond the deck. It affects how many carriers the Navy needs to maintain presence in multiple regions. It affects how long a carrier can remain on station without relief and how adversaries calculate risk and escalation. It even affects how allies view the balance of power at sea. All of that stems from a capability that does not fire a shot. The USS Gerald R. Ford carries 90 aircraft, but its real strength is not how many jets it can carry. It is how quickly it can turn them into pressure over and over again. And that's only one piece of the picture. Every carrier, no matter how advanced, lives or dies by how efficiently it moves people, fuel, weapons, and aircraft through a very crowded space. The flight deck may look enormous, but in practice, it is one of the most congested workplaces on the planet. Every movement has to be choreographed because mistakes cost time. Every bottleneck compounds on older carriers. Those bottlenecks were accepted as the price of doing business. Steam catapults dictated launch timing. Weapons elevators moved at fixed speeds. Deck crews worked around island placement that reflected decades-old design assumptions. When everything ran perfectly, the system worked. When it did not, the pace slowed. And once the pace slowed, it was. The Ford class was designed by folks who were done with the old ways. Instead of just pushing crews harder, the Navy focused on cutting out the friction in the system. The result? A carrier that feels less like a traditional warship and more like a streamlined factory. This shift kicks off with the biggest change, even if a lot of people don't get it. The Ford class swapped out steam catapults for something way more efficient. The Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, or EMALS, sounds super cool, right? It's often seen as a tech marvel with its electromagnetic launch and precise control. But here's the kicker, recovering jets can really slow things down on carriers. You've got aircraft circling overhead while deck crews rush to clear space, and those small delays can snowball into bigger issues. The Ford class tackles this by totally rethinking how the deck flows. Radar systems was moved further aft. That change sounds minor, but it opens up valuable deck space and alters how aircraft move between landing areas, parking spots, and catapults. Below the deck, the changes become even more consequential. Weapons movement has always been one of the slowest parts of carrier operations. Bombs and missiles are heavy, sensitive, and dangerous to move. The Ford class introduced advanced weapons elevators designed to move ordnance faster and more efficiently. These elevators were meant to be one of the ship's biggest contributors to improved operational tempo. Every part of the system has to move together. That is why the Ford class was designed as a single machine rather than a collection of upgrades. Automation plays a quiet but critical role here. The Ford class carries fewer sailors than previous carriers. Even though it is larger and more complex, that reduction was not achieved by asking people to work harder. It was achieved by designing systems that require fewer hands to operate and maintain. All of these changes point in the same direction. Faster launches, faster recoveries, faster weapons handling, less friction between steps. There is no single moment where the ship reveals its power. Instead, the advantage accumulates quietly hour by hour. This is also where the price tag begins to look different. $13 billion sounds outrageous when you imagine a ship sitting at sea doing nothing. It sounds less outrageous when you consider what the Navy expects that ship to do over decades of service. Most navies around the world do not operate carriers like this. Many operate them as symbols of national power or regional influence. Their carriers launch fewer aircraft less frequently and for shorter durations. That is not a flaw. It reflects different strategic goals. The U.S. Navy expects its carriers to serve as mobile air bases capable of sustained combat operations far from home. That expectation drives everything about their design. The Ford class pushes that expectation further than any carrier before it. All this engineering effort is really about one thing: protecting something delicate, the pace of operations. When a carrier slows down, it becomes predictable, and that predictability makes it manageable. Once it's manageable, its deterrent value drops. The Ford class is designed to push that moment as far away as possible. It won't guarantee dominance or eliminate risk. Nothing can do that. What it does is buy time, and in modern naval warfare, time is everything. Resource everyone is trying to steal from everyone else. To understand why this carrier changes everything, you have to stop looking at it as a ship and start looking at it as a signal. Aircraft carriers do not exist in isolation. Every carrier sails inside a web of assumptions made by allies, adversaries, economists, and planners who spend their careers asking uncomfortable questions about power. How long can it stay? How much pressure can it apply? How quickly can it recover if something goes wrong? The Ford class is meant to sustain pressure thousands of miles away from home against an opponent who is actively trying to make operations expensive, risky, and exhausting. This is why comparisons between carriers can be misleading. Looking at raw numbers like displacements, music, or aircraft capacity misses the point. A carrier that can launch 40 aircraft in a short window and then slow down is fundamentally different from one that can keep launching aircraft all day long. The difference shows up not in the first hour of a conflict, but in the third day, the fifth day, and the second week. The Pacific theater is defined by distance. Bases are separated by hundreds or even thousands of miles. Replenishment takes time. Aircraft spend long periods in transit. Every sortie becomes more expensive in fuel maintenance and crew fatigue. In that environment, pauses are dangerous. If a carrier has to slow down to reset, the opponent gains space. That space can be used to disperse assets, repair damage, reposition defenses, or simply, in a high-stakes conflict, timing is everything. Analysts talk about windows for strikes and resupply, and these are tight, measured in hours. A carrier that can quickly regenerate aircraft shrinks those windows for the enemy, changing how they assess risk. Can they handle the pressure? Dealing with constant pressure is way tougher than handling short bursts of activity, followed by breaks. That's why the Ford class has caught the eye of planners focused on China. China's naval strategy is all about layered defenses and long-range missiles, aiming to complicate carrier operations and make their presence costly, both politically and militarily. Tempo is key in sustaining operations. A carrier launching aircraft keeps defenses busy, revealing their position and draining resources over time. Even advanced systems wear down because they're run by humans with limits. The Ford class's ability to maintain air power extends its threat level, changing the game entirely. The Navy's carrier needs often get overlooked in cost debates. Sure, the Ford class is pricey, but it's not just about the price tag. The idea is that one high-tempo carrier can do the work of several older ships over time, thanks to automation and fewer crew demands, but those benefits take time to kick in. They only show up if the ship can perform reliably for decades. That's why early tech issues got so much buzz. Other countries eye the Ford class as a sneak peek into future carrier designs. A carrier that operates well keeps pressure without escalating things, signaling strength quietly without needing big, dramatic moves. The Ford class isn't just about raw firepower, it forces enemies to react constantly. Which is pretty intense, right? But this advantage comes at a cost. Keeping up sustained operations drains resources, wears out aircraft, tightens maintenance schedules, and stresses supply chains. The Navy knows this trade-off and isn't pretending otherwise. The Ford class carrier doesn't eliminate friction in war, it just shifts it. Instead of slowing down, the challenges move to logistics, enemy defenses, and decision-making. It's part of a system, not a solo act. It needs escorts for protection, supply ships, and intel from satellites to keep its aircraft flying. Opponents must plan for endurance. Carriers can't just expect a break after the first wave. They need to gear up for ongoing operations that push systems and people to their limits. This prep is costly and forces tough choices on where to focus resources. The USS Gerald R Ford was designed to keep moving, with its secret weapon being its sortie generation rate. The target is 160 sorties a day, but we can ramp it up to 270 during intense operations. These aren't just numbers, they shape the ship's design. The quicker we complete the cycle, the more pressure we put on defenses in a Pacific conflict. That speed is crucial. It really changes how air defenses react. Carriers face constant pressure, with sensors working overtime and crews getting worn out. Mistakes happen. A carrier that does more in less time eases the load on the fleet. Sure, the Ford class is pricey and had its issues, but the Navy isn't just buying a fancier Nimitz. They're changing how carriers perform under stress. Sword degeneration doesn't make the carrier invincible. Enemy missiles are still a threat, Weather can mess things up, and even the best crews get worn out. Other navies shouldn't just copy the Ford class. Many can't and shouldn't. The real power of a modern aircraft carrier isn't just in what it fires. It's all about how often it can fire and how long it can keep going when everyone thinks it'll stop. That's the secret weapon. It's already changing how future wars will be planned, whether folks want to admit it or not. So, if you were designing the next-gen carriers, would you focus on flash or endurance? Would you go for spectacle or plan for the long haul? Drop your thoughts below. I read them all. Keep enjoying these real naval stories. Hit that join button on our channel page to help us uncover even more. Thanks for watching. More exciting content is on the way. Catch you in the next one.